My respectful salutations to His Eminence Dzongsa Chinti Rinpoche, Dongse Nambanyi, Venerable monks, sadhus, and friends. The organizers asked me to speak on the tradition of Buddhist education or Buddhist Shiksha. I have several limitations. The medium for this gathering is English, so my knowledge of English is absolutely inadequate, so I may not be able to communicate properly. But fortunately, we have two gishis here. If I find some shortage of vocabulary, I will take their help. And particularly in the presence of most eminent people, the Eminence Rinpoches is quite difficult for me to talk about from my very limited knowledge. As Pawan Gupta explained yesterday, our idea of having this gathering was to put forward the view of Shiksha from the various traditions without any comparison with today's situation or no comparative studies among themselves. Make a kind of a status report. What kind of tradition in Buddhism, in Hinduism, in Jainism, or in the contemporary Jiddu Krishnamurti and so on and so forth. Shri Aurobindo, and there are so many new systems were also there. My presentation at this moment would be quite different from the very dynamic and thought-provoking presentations we have had this morning and just before the tea break. I will talk very limitedly what are the Tibetan traditional Buddhist looks at the system of Shiksha. Before doing that, I think we must discuss a little bit what is tradition. The tradition is a very common word which we are using in these days. Particularly, we use this word in contrast with the modernity. Tradition and modernity appears to be two opposite sides of a thing. And many people also consider all these systems perpetuated for a long time, from generation to generation, becomes a tradition. Unless we define what is tradition clearly, it is dangerous to talk about tradition. So therefore, I would like to say a few words what we consider a tradition. There are many different definitions about tradition, but one of the not very recent but recent explanation given by Kumaraswamy, the great scholar from Sri Lanka. He says tradition need to be three components: originated from a divine source, coming down unbroken lineage, and verifiable by logic and common sense. If these three things are there, then we can only consider as a tradition. Otherwise, a habit or a system perpetuated for a long time does not make a tradition. Tibetan people, particularly in a very high altitude, do not take bath. Not only for a few years, but generation to generation, they do not take bath. That's not a Tibetan tradition. It is something habit. In Hinduism also, in the beginning, there was a division of responsibility or division of labor, and now it become a system of caste or varan, color. That is not a part of tradition, but it is a corruption which entered into a system and then perpetuated from generation to generation. And there are many other things, social, political systems. Marxism is not a tradition. Communism is not a tradition. Capitalism is not a tradition, because they are not originated from a divine source or an authentic source, if I use the Buddhist terminology. In Hindi and Sanskrit language, the word is very good. Param, para. Param refers to the ultimate, and para refers to the unbroken lineage. A knowledge or a wisdom which is shown by an authentic person, Paramana Purusha, Chibutsema, a Paramana Purusha who has seen the reality, and he tells us what he has seen. And then it comes through an unbroken lineage to my own Kalyan Mitra who have given that information to me. And that unbroken lineage is not sufficient. That information shall have to be verified by my own logic and common sense. That means I have to understood it as it has been conveyed. Without understanding only the what we call it hearsay. In the court of law also, the hearsay evidence are not considered as valid evidence. So therefore we have to understood, verified by one's own knowledge. And that kind of thing is called a tradition. So therefore, whatever the Buddhist people do, or whatever the monasteries does, should not be considered as a part of tradition. There are so many horrifying masks and dances and so many rituals are there. There might be a kind of part of performance or part of cultural expression, but this should not be considered as a tradition. So parampara and tradition need to be defined in a very clear way. So therefore, when we talk about Buddhist tradition, we shall have to see from this angle. I took Kumar Swami's reference because he was a modern scholar accepted by most of the Western academic world. Otherwise, it is very similar what the traditional itself says. The traditional itself says that like a river should come from the glacier, wisdom must begin from an authentic person, a Parmana Purusha. And then there should be a lineage which is unbroken and which should be understood by oneself. So this is quite similar with what the Buddhist tradition talk about. So by that way, we should define about the tradition as I mentioned. Then since yesterday we are talking about education and Shiksha. Each language, they have its own idiom. And the literary meaning of that idiom may not be seen, but they are using in equivalence while interpreting. The Shiksha, if we have to interpret it into English language, then there is no any other word. The education shall have to be used. But I think the division between these two words, I was the culprit, perhaps, to create it in the beginning. Long time back, when I was in Varanasi, Sarnath, there was a big conference of the Gandhians and the Sarvodayas on education, which took place in Rajghat. And one section was held in Sarnath, in the Tibetan Institute. And I was told to talk about Buddhist education. Since I was quite a critic of English language, modernity, and all this, I always minority of one. Still, I do these things. So, half jokingly and half seriously, I started my talk saying that I do not know anything about education. So, therefore, I can't speak on education. I have little knowledge about Shiksha. If you allow me, I will talk about something about Shiksha. This was, as I mentioned, it was half joking and half sarcastically I make the remark. And our most respected friend Dharampalji took these words quite seriously, and he published it into several magazines and newspapers. I have said that. And that became a kind of snowballing, and since then people are talking about, we are not talking about education, we are talking about Shiksha and so on and so forth. But this morning, Geshe-Ngao Samdhong has very rightly clarified it, and which was appreciated by many other participants. So therefore, we do not enter into an argument or fight between the two words. Of course, the word education, if literally define it, it may not give the sense of Shiksha. Shiksha is a very appropriate word. When it translated into a Tibetan language, it becomes more easy and appropriate to interpret in many ways Lhapa. Lhapa, the same word, can be understood for learning, for dissemination, for teaching, for practice, training, abhyas, and all these vast of different connotations can be communicated by only one word, Lhapa. Lhapa, Lhapa, Lhapa. A little bit of differentiation in the pronunciation, it will convey so many different messages. So that is preliminary remarks which I wanted to make. Now, what is the view? What is the traditional Buddhist view about Shiksha? I would say Buddhist view of Shiksha is neither confined to teaching, to learning, to practice, to training, or something, a particular thing, but it refers to the dispelsion of ignorance and awakening of the wisdom. All these different actions, training, teaching, instruction, practice, meditation, arguments, dialogues, examination, analyzation, all these are ultimately aimed for eradication of ignorance and awakening of the wisdom. Eradication of ignorance and awakening of wisdom cannot come through passing the information. Number one, it cannot come through indoctrination, definitely not through indoctrination. It cannot come through brainwashing. It cannot come through by influence or persuasion or arguments and requests or whatever it may be. That dispelling of the ignorance shall have to be come through the awakening of the wisdom. It is automatically with each other. Why we need to awake? Why the human intelligence need to be awake? Because human beings have been called as a Purush. The Purush is not only the Purushan Stri, the whole mankind is referred in Sanskrit as a Purusha. The literal meaning of Purusha is able and having potential. What humankind has a potential different from the animal world and other realms, because the humankind has a potential to discriminate the right and wrong. And that kind of wisdom can be achieved by human effort. And all these sentient beings have the seed of wisdom. Therefore, from the Buddhist viewpoint, equality of all sentient beings is on the basis of potential of awakening, not basis of the present position. So that's why entire sentient beings are considered as a potential of a Buddhahood, a potential of having potential of awakening. And that potential is equal to each sentient being, but only the humankind is able to awake that. The other realms does not have that kind of power or the ability. So that is why the humankind is called Purush. And therefore, the Purush can do long-term benefits and can achieve long-term objectives and can think of that. Now coming back to why the humanity should make an effort to awake their inner intelligence, inner wisdom, because it is the inherent nature of every sentient being who do not like suffering, misery, and like happiness and freedom. Not liking sorrow and liking happiness is inherent in all sentient beings. And therefore it is their right as well, their birthright, to pursue freedom from suffering and to achieve peace and tranquility. That's their basic right, which cannot be violated by nature or by man's force, whatever it may be. That's why this morning, Professor Samdhong has very beautifully mentioned about the teaching of Four Noble Truths. Four Noble Truth begins from the truth of suffering, because that need to be eradicated. And how to eradicate is to identify the cause of suffering and then find an antidote to the cause. And by practicing that antidote, the cause is eliminated. By eliminating the cause of suffering, then can achieve the freedom from suffering. This is a natural sequence, natural cause and effect. This is very simple. If we sum up what is suffering, the suffering can be categorized in two different kinds. Basically, it's three different kinds. I am making two to reduce confusions. One is the real pain, which is considered to be unpleasant feeling. Unpleasant feeling, all kind of unpleasant feeling is one of suffering. The other kind of suffering is potential of suffering or the basis of suffering. For example, we have the bondage of karma and kleshas to this body. Our consciousness within the capacity of the force of karma, the ordinary people cannot be there. So therefore, the bondage is the basis of unpleasant feeling and suffering. then the unpleasant feeling, the pain, the real pain, in the ordinary sense also we categorize as a pain and as suffering. There are also two kinds of this life suffering and suffering which might be perpetuated in a life after life. Considering that you are accepting the continuity of life. Having the right to make effort to find a solution to immediate suffering and future possible suffering, and freedom from, complete freedom from all kind of suffering. There are three different kind of objectives, possible objectives, and then the people, the humankind, can choose any of these objectives. Therefore, the ancient Indian people, ancient Indian sage and seers categorize the Purusharths in the four categories as mentioned this morning. Calm and earth is only for this life, ihik jivan. Dharma and moksha, that is in continuity life and in ultimate sense. So by this way, the ancient Indian Buddhist scholars has categorized the humankind into three categories: the ordinary person, the medium person, and the great person. Adam Purush, Madhyam Purush, तथा Uttam Purush. How categorize this? The Adam Purush means who only think about the next life, coming next life, and how to avoid reborn in lower realms and to have a good realm in the next life, so that he may not get suffer in the lower realms. That man is of Adam Purush. And the Madhyam Purush is not only caring for the coming lives and thereafter lives, but who is looking for a permanent solution to the worldly circle between birth and death, and reborning by the force of karma and kleshas. And for that, a cessation of karma and klesha, and achieving a nirvana, the state of nirvana, state of moksha, that is the Madhyam Purush. The Uttam Purush means who is not looking for self-salvation and achieving nirvana only for oneself, but to serve entire sentient beings. And for serving entire sentient beings, we cannot do at this moment. Only if you achieve the Buddha nature and having the omniscient Sarvagyan and all the Buddha's powers. So therefore, in order to serve entire sentient beings, for aiming to the achievement of Buddhahood, that's the Uttam Purush. Who are looking for only this life's pleasure and benefits, perhaps they do not need any shiksha, or they need at most is a little bit of training in skills, how to earn money by hook or crook, and That's all. Shiksha, in Buddhist sense, begins from the Adam Purush, who is caring for the next and next lives. And of course, for looking for nirvana, that means Shiksha. And of course, for achieving the Buddha nature, that need wisdom of knowing everything. For that, we have to learn everything. So, the objective of Shiksha is to dispel the ignorance in order to achieve some of the objectives which are inspiring for the Adam Purush or Madhyam Purush or Uttam Purush. And for that matter, you need education, you need Shiksha. And now, how to impart that Shiksha? To entering into process of education or Shiksha, Swadhyaya or self-study is not enough. That will not able to achieve wholesome education. Now here comes the tradition, because we do not have the power to see all the unknowing things. Some of things we can see from our ordinary perception. There are many things which are not perceivable by ordinary perception. They need to be inferred through a logic, through reasoning. And more subtle things, they need to be inferred through words of the authentic people, the Parmana Purusha. So therefore, without a helper who guides, who gives information, who guides how to use the information, and therefore the beginning of Shiksha is the establishment of a relationship between the Kalyan Mitra and the disciples. Of course, in the Buddhist canon, the word of Guru is invariably used, but the majority of the Charavakyan and Paramitayan canon do not use the word of Guru quite often. They use the word Kalyan Mitra. Kalyan Mitra refers to a person who is not above and giving instructions or orders, who is just a friend at equal level and approachable, and with whom you can argue, with whom you can differ, with whom you can argumentative and to learn, and who looks after you by various things. So therefore the relationship between the Kalyan Mitra and oneself is considered to be the entrance gate of Shiksha. And therefore, who is qualified Kalyan Mitra, who is not qualified Kalyan Mitra, that I will not repeat, very beautifully mentioned from the Sutra Alankar, Shinyanti Varshvanishwar, that Professor sometimes has mentioned this morning. I only add a few things from the Abhisamayamaka. Simming one so no nimes so twenty. He between Chokorwa, number 20. I do not remember Sanskrit. You also perhaps not remember. Anyhow, even he remembers Sanskrit, many people may not understand as good as Tibetan language. Simming one, it refers to the first responsibility of Kalyan Mitra is to remove the fear from the mind of the disciple. The disciples have many fear of ignorance, fear of difficulty of learning, fear of the long process of learning, and so on and so forth. And the first Kalyan Mitra's teacher's responsibility is to remove the fear, and not only fear, a kind of inferiority complex. I cannot do this, I cannot do that. This is the basic hindrance to education, basic hindrance to the Shiksha. So therefore, the teacher's first responsibility is to remove that fear. Then second is, of course, imparting the teaching, the information, the third is to look after the student, how to remove his problems and difficulties, the Metunchokorwa. In the process of learning, the students might have various kind of difficulties and hindrances, and the teacher should have the ability to know the difficulties of the disciple, and not only knowing the difficulty and the hindrances, but having the ability and power to remove them, how to remove them by joint effort. So that is the qualification of Kalyan Mitra. And it is not enough to have a Kalyan Mitras having the 10 qualifications or the 3 qualifications. The disciple or the student shall also have to have a basic qualification, basic requirements, without which the person cannot become a student, Shikshathi or Vidyarthi. To become a Vidyarthi or to become a Shisharthi, the basic 3 qualifications are required. The first is having unbiased mind, and second is having good intelligence, and the third is inquisitiveness. So is from Shishak of Nagarjuna. Ayadeva, sorry. Ayadeva. Do you remember that sentence? Okay, it's okay. If someone is biased mind, that means preconcepts on any subject. You have already your own concept or perception or manyata in a subject. Then it will not. It will be not easy to teach something afresh, and therefore your mind should not be. Even you know something while listening to the Kalyan Mitra, you have to put aside all your own so-called knowledge or so-called conditioning or whatever it may be. They shall have to be clean. You have to clean slate on which something can be inscribed. Then you have sufficient intelligence. If you are absolutely unintelligent and very poor in IQ, then you are not able to become a Shisharthi. And then of course you have to have a desire or willingness to learn. Willingness to learn is sometimes very difficult. There are many ambitious students who wanted to get high marks in an examination. They do not have willingness to learn. They only have willingness to remember and omit it in the time of examination and having nothing to do with their life. And that is not willingness to learn. Willingness to learn means to inquire into it spiritually in order to improve one's own mind and in order to reach seeing the things ultimately as it is. So for that kind of willingness, it must be there. Then the question comes, then there will be very few qualified students. But again, it is the responsibility of the teacher, the Kalyana Mitra, who have the ability to impart all these three qualifications into the prospective students or into the students which are liking into these things. They shall have to be giving or imparting or creating this kind of qualification in the student's mind. That is also the responsibility of the teacher. Then thereafter, the Shishak has the all qualifications to be a Vidyarthi, and the Kalyana Mitra has all the qualifications to be a guide or to be a teacher. Then there must be a relationship between these two. That relationship is considered to be a very secret and very important. Relationship doesn't mean that the Kalyana Mitra has all the authority and he can instruct or order anything or everything to the Vidyarthi. No, the relationship is a common agreement to learning together, making together efforts, joint efforts, in order to awake the inner intelligence of the student who is looking for either an objective of Adam Purush or Madhyam Purush or Uttam Purush. So, any one of these objectives, in order to achieve that, the determination of joint effort and determination of working together is the basis of relationship between the teacher and the student. Then how impart the Shiksha? The wisdom of Kalyana Mitra cannot be transferred to the student. The wisdom shall have to be manifested by student itself. And there is no Shakti path or there is no transfer of wisdom. Then how to do? This is through dialogue, through discussion, through teaching. And the metaphor is a candle, a lighted candle lighting the other candle. The first lighting candle does not transfer anything to the second candle when it lights, but it causes the light in the other candle. So the Kalyan Mitra shall have to have the capacity and the potential, the power to cause the awakening of the wisdom in the student's mind. Having said that, now what is the real process of education? The real process of education is, as mentioned this morning, there are only three Shiksha, threefold Shiksha, the Shila, Samadhi, and the Pragyan. Shila, Samadhi, Pragyan, for achieving a moksha or Buddhahood, of course, you will require all these three in its fullest manner. Otherwise also, even learning something ordinary skill or ordinary knowledge, we have to have all these three, not in a real sense, but like of these three disciplines. Otherwise, you cannot do anything. Even learning calligraphy, how to write a letter, you have to have observed certain discipline, how to catch the pen, how to hold the paper, and how to move. All this you cannot do whatever you like. There is certain discipline. And at that time you shall have to concentrate. Your eye and your mind shall have to concentrate how you write. And then of course you have to the knowledge how to write car and how to write car. Without having the knowledge of this, how to write it, you cannot do that. So even writing a car, you have to have the wisdom how to write the car. You have to follow certain discipline, where the pen should put and how to move it, and also concentration of mind. In the morning, making a cup of tea, you need all these three. Should sugar put first, or should tea put first, or should water put first? You should know. And you also shall have to follow, and how much water is to be boiled and how to boil, so on and so forth. So this threefold Shiksha is necessary for anything and everything, from the smallest action to the achievement of Buddhahood. So therefore, I think it is really the Buddha's wisdom to categorize the Shiksha, entire Shiksha, into the threefold categories. Now, how to achieve that threefold Shiksha? Then he gave the three ways. Learning through hearing and reading, Shruti, and then learning through contemplation, examination and analyzation, that is Chintan, and then after having the authentic knowledge through contemplation, then you meditate upon it. That is bhava. So then real education, real Shiksha comes thereafter. The hearing gives you the Chintanmaya Pragyan. That means a wisdom which is created by hearing. And then that is a borrowed knowledge. It is just heard or read from somebody else. Then you do contemplation on it, and then you will have your own experience or your own understanding. That is Chintanmaya Pragyan. And then you meditate upon it. Meditation is also in the two categories, contemplative meditation and concentrative meditation. So through both of these processes, then you perceive the reality. That is the Chintanmaya Pragyan. Therefore, the Buddhist viewpoint of having Shiksha is, first of all, to have a teacher and taught relationship, and secondly, the student have his or her own qualification for becoming a Shishatri or student, and thirdly, go through the process of the threefold Shiksha through the process of hearing, contemplation, and meditation, and finally the realization. So this is a nutshell how the Buddhists traditionally look to education. Again, the most important responsibility lies with the Kalyan Mitra or the teacher. The teacher have to deal with the students, his followers or disciples, through four different kind of skillful methods. The first skillful method is to look after the students' physical needs, worldly needs. If somebody doesn't have a book, the teacher should arrange that book. A student is lacking food or clothing or shelter. That also comes the responsibility of the teacher. We have a saying in the Tibetan language, To Gu Chusung. The teacher shall have to give food, cloth, and teaching, all three co-agenda. Whatever is a necessity to remain as a faithful Shisharthi, the needs are to be provided or help to provide by the teacher, by the Kalyan Mitra. And also the Kalyan Mitra should have an appropriate and attractive way of talking. The Kalyan Mitra should not be rude and using harsh words to the students. Although in Tibet there's a habit, teachers use very harsh words to their students, there's a different matter. But according to Mahayana teaching, they have to be skillful in conversation so that the student's mind can always be remain careful, happy, and not be depressed and not living the tension. Then the teacher need to observe his or her own behavior, morality, moral standards. Whatever he or she want to teach to the students, he has to live with that, making an exemplary. Without living by oneself, the teaching becomes hypocritic. So therefore, whatever need to be taught, the teacher must be live with it and experienced with it. And then thereafter, finally, the teacher shall have to have the wisdom to understand the likings and dislikings and the attitude of the student and deal with the student according to his or her own likings, dislikings and attitude and capacity. Not overloading teaching without the over and above the capacity of the student, and teaching something which doesn't like for students, so on and so forth. This kind of understanding is very necessary. So I think I have taken a lot of time, and I have just drawn an overview picture of education network or forces which are perceived by the Buddhist tradition. And I shall stop here. Is okay?
This is fine.
Right. I shall stop here. And
Can I ask questions?
no. We are in the Krishnamurti tradition. Should I say Krishnamurti tradition? Leave with the question, not asking the question. Sorry, I welcome any comments or questions, challenging or clarification, whatever.
No, simple question. You take the mic.
I very much appreciate basically the way you have put the things, that's beyond doubt. What occurs to me is that if you see the history of man, say 2000, 5000, whatever is there, many a times it has happened that the Kalyan Mitra unconsciously has become an authority. Because that's a tendency of the human beings to possess others, to control others. This is one. Now that has gone to another end of modernity today, which I really wish to share with you, and I hope you can guide us. Today what has happened is that the computer has become a better teacher on account of excess of information that the computer, the net, the mobile phone, the communication which is there in all that. Now in this no Kalyan Mitra, computer replacing it, the students today, they go in a kind of isolation. And in that isolation, the greater chance of a brain undergoing depression has increased tremendously. I would like you to really respond to this, what actually is happening now. Sorry for the long question.
No, it is not long question, it is an appropriate question. Kalyan Mitra must have the capacity to understand the aptitude and the requirement of the student. A student which need an authoritative Kalyan Mitra, then there should be deal with it with authority and with a kind of dictatorship. It is not the arrogance of the Kalyan Mitra, but it is the requirement of the student. How dealt Narupa by Tilopa and how dealt Milarepa by Marpa is horrifying. Almost in modern terms, it may say that the teacher is violating the students' human rights, and they might go to the Human Rights Commission. But that was the requirement of the student, and that exactly what requirement of the student is known by the teacher. That is the capacity and that's the skillfulness of the teacher. But he is not authoritarian in his mind. And later on, for example, Marpa told Milarepa that you should not deal with your students as I dealt with you. Because in your time, they will not have such qualified students, you will not find it. So you have to be quite soft. So that's a true instrument, a handy instrument is there. So when we are in Varanasi, we used to talk about selective acceptance or ultimate rejection. Computer comes in that category. We have to accept for some time as selectively, but ultimately we have to reject it. Computer only can impart information, not wisdom. Nor it can cause awakening of your wisdom. It can only aid information to your brain system.
And as we input information in the computer, and that kind of information can input by computer in your brain, and that input information in your brain can never be a source of awakening of your inner intelligence. I'm making this statement quite, what I should say, arrogantly, but
It's necessary.
but I'm open to anyone who proves to me that computer can substitute a Kalyana, then I'm ready to face it.
Then you'll buy a laptop.